but less than $1 trillion in cuts. And most of those cuts are gimmicks. They assume savings from more spending that the President has not requested that is unlikely to materialize. I notice the majority leaders here, and I would be glad to yield without losing my right to the floor and also without having my remarks interrupted.
Mr. President.
Without objection, the majority leader.
I appreciate my good friend from Utah, my longtime friend, for yielding to me, and I agree that his remarks should not appear interrupted in the record. I ask unanimous consent that morning business be extended until 6:45 p.m. today, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, and at 6:45 I be recognized.
Without objection. The senator from Utah.
And most of these cuts were gimmicks. They assume savings from more spending that the President has not requested and that is unlikely to materialize. It does not include a balanced budget amendment. And most importantly, from my perspective, it assumes a massive tax increase in 2013 by allowing the 2001-2003 tax relief to expire, allowing the AMT to hit middle-class taxpayers, and allowing for increases in estate taxes that are a small business and job killer. You won't see that, though, in the talking points. They buried the breadth of that tax hit on their baseline assumptions. But we know that President Obama and his liberal allies are planning massive tax increases on the middle class. And while their rhetoric suggests that we can fix our debt crisis just by raising taxes on the rich and closing loopholes, the reality is that they are setting the stage to roll back tax expenditures. And cutting back tax expenditures will be a tax increase on middle-income itemizers. When Democrats talk about tax expenditures, they are talking about your ability to purchase a home or save for retirement or give to your church or put away money for your children's education. That is where the money is. It is not in bonus depreciation for corporate jets, and it is not in tax benefits for energy companies. It is not in changing the treatment of carried interest for private equity companies. It is not in repealing the deduction for mortgage interest related to yachts used as second homes. This issue of tax expenditures is confusing and demands greater clarity. As ranking member of the Finance Committee, it is my responsibility to correct the record on what the curtailment or elimination of tax expenditures would really mean for taxpayers and families. I have spoken about tax expenditures a number of times in the last few weeks. But given the failure of the President and his congressional allies to take on our spending crisis, I want to reemphasize the essential point. If Democrats are permitted to balance the budget, it will result in new tax burdens for the middle class. Tax expenditures are not, quote, spending through the tax code, unquote. They are an opportunity for you to keep more of your own money. And they are not, by and large, special interest benefits that disproportionately benefit wealthy taxpayers. The Democrats' rhetoric on expenditures does not jibe with the reality of our tax code. The data are clear. Tax expenditures tend to skew towards taxpayers below the President's definition of the rich. Let's work through some examples of what concrete proposals to cut back tax expenditures would yield in revenue and what they would mean to middle-income Americans. I'm going to take a look at the budget outline presented by our friend and colleague, the distinguished chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. The Senate Democratic Caucus outline was discussed among the larger Democratic caucus. Republican members, including long-standing Budget Committee members, were briefed by reading the details of the outline in the Washington Post. The Senate Democratic budget called for $2.38 trillion in tax increases when measured against the current policy baseline. The current policy baseline represents the level of taxation Americans are currently paying. According to materials released by Senate Budget Committee Democrats, they are looking at three categories of tax increases. The first category would raise marginal rates on single taxpayers with $500,000 and over in income and married couples with $1 million and over in income. For those taxpayers, including many small business owners, the marginal rates would rise by 17%. According to the Tax Policy Center, or TPC, a think tank often cited by our friends on the other side, certainly not a conservative think tank, at least 38% of flow-through income, much of its small business income, would be subject to the marginal rate hike. The marginal rate on capital gain and dividend income would rise by 33%. Keep in mind that the IRS statistics of income group reports that 65% of capital gain income would be hit by this tax hike. Add in the tax increases from Obamacare, and in less than 18 months, the marginal rates on capital gains and dividends will rise by 59%. Is that a positive signal for investors to move capital into projects? That tax hike represents $380 billion of tax increases in the Democratic budget. Now, look at this chart, the Senate Democrat budget tax increases. The total tax increases needed are $2,380 million. They suggest, number one, raise the marginal rates on singles over $200,000 and married over $250,000. That is $380 billion. Closing corporate loopholes and curtailing offshore tax evasion is $262 billion. And the remaining tax increases needed from tax expenditures would be $1,738 billion. So you would take total tax increases needed, $2,380 billion, reduce the $380 billion for the raising in marginal rates on singles over $200,000 and married over $250,000, reduce closing corporate loopholes and curtailing offshore tax evasion for $262 billion, and remaining tax increases needed from tax expenditures alone would be $1,738 billion. Now, the second category of tax increases in the Democratic budget is a set of concepts we've heard about for years in Senate floor speeches. President Obama frequently refers to them as well. We also see these concepts mentioned in the vast left-of-center D.C. think tank establishment and by liberal pundits. They fall into two groups of proposals. The first group is closing corporate loopholes. The second group is curtailing offshore tax avoidance of evasion. Now, again, as you can see, they want to increase taxes $2,380 billion. They want to raise the marginal rates on singles over $200,000, married over $250,000. That's $380 billion. And they want to close, they want to close corporate loopholes and curtailing offshore tax evasion. They think they can save $262 billion on that. And that still leaves $1,738 billion. Now, Finance Committee Republican staff compiled all known, specified, and scored proposals in these two groups. Staff calculated the proposals as summing $262 billion over 10 years. The numbers are Joint Committee on Taxation scores. I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a summary of the staff calculations.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. To President Obama's credit, he put his money where his rhetoric is. Most of the loophole closures and offshore measures were contained in his budget. If you subtract the two categories of tax increases, then there remains $1.73 trillion in tax increases that the Senate Democratic budget must find by cutting back tax expenditures. Now, there we go again. This is a very important chart. I'll remind everyone of something I mentioned in my first discussion of tax expenditures. The Joint Committee on Taxation warns us that the tax expenditure figures are not the same as revenue estimates for policy changes. In March 2011, the CBO released a set of budget options for deficit reduction. On the revenue options, CBO and Joint Committee on Taxation estimated the proposals. There are a number of them that deal with cutbacks on tax expenditures. If we start with the Senate Democratic budget's target of $1.73 trillion, we can see an illustration of some policy options that tax writers would have to consider. I have a chart that lists the revenue raised from some of these options. Now, look at this chart. It may be difficult to read on the television monitor, so I'll go through them. These are tax expenditure policy options from the Congressional Budget Office to raise revenue. In other words, they're going to tax and take away these tax expenditures. Number one would be they would eliminate the deduction for state and local taxes. I don't think many people are going to want that to happen. Number two, they'll tax Social Security benefits similar to the defined benefit distribution. That's $438 billion right there in increased taxes. Number three is tax investment income from life insurance and annuities. That's $260 billion. Number four, curtail the deduction for charitable giving. Can you believe that? That's $219 billion. Number five, gradually eliminate the mortgage interest deduction. Take that away from people who buy homes. That's $215 billion. Eliminate the child tax credit. That's $117 billion. Raise tax rates on capital gains. That's $49 billion. Eliminate, number eight, eliminate education tax benefits. That's $48 billion. Number nine, reduce 401k contribution limits. That's $46 billion. And number 10, tax carried interest as ordinary income. That's $21 billion. Well, the first one should cause some concern to my friends on the other side. It would eliminate the state and local income and sales tax deduction. The so-called blue states generally have very high state and local tax burdens. Eliminating that deduction will mean that constituents of my friends representing those states will find themselves with an effective tax increase of up to 35%. That's what they're doing to themselves. Eliminating this deduction would yield revenue of $862 billion over 10 years. The second one here would reduce after-tax value of Social Security benefits received by seniors. This CBO option would tax Social Security benefits like we do employer-provided defined benefit retirement plans. Funny how much fur has flown over Social Security reform, yet this cutback on Social Security benefits has flown under the radar. It appears that not all tax expenditures are about corporate jets and yachts. That proposal would raise $438 billion over 10 years. I mean, come on. Hit Social Security for something like that? Well, let's look at the third tax expenditure cutback option. That would tax the inside buildup in life insurance. Here's an example. Under current law, if a father or mother buys a $100,000 life insurance policy and makes the surviving spouse or children beneficiaries, death will trigger a tax-free benefit of $100,000. Under this option, this tax expenditure, if they get rid of that, the difference between the face amount of the policy and premium payments would be taxable. According to the CBO option book, that new tax would raise $260 billion over 10 years. Who wants to do that? The fourth one on the list is a tax benefit near and dear to many of my fellow Utah families. It is the itemized deduction for charitable donations. Under this option, only those deductions that exceed 2% of adjusted gross income would be deductible. Now, for many Utahns who tithe, and I'm one of them, we tithe 10% of our gross income. This would mean an automatic cut of 20% of our deduction. Not just Utahns, but charitable givers all over the country. This proposal would reduce the tax benefit of charitable giving by $219 billion over 10 years. Now, the fifth one is well known to tens of millions of our constituents. It is the home mortgage interest deduction. If a taxpayer saves up a down payment and borrows for a home, they can take the interest paid on the mortgage as an itemized deduction. This proposal would gradually eliminate the home mortgage interest deduction. In 10 years, the deduction would be gone. This proposal would raise $215 billion over 10 years. The sixth tax expenditure cutback option involves the current $1,000 per child tax credit. Now, that credit drops to $500 per child in 18 months if the 2001-2003 tax relief plans are not extended. It is, by definition, limited to lower and middle-income tax-paying families. CBO tells us, the Congressional Budget Office tells us, that if we were to eliminate it, there would be $117 billion raised over 10 years. The seventh tax expenditure cutback would partially eliminate the tax expenditure for lower rate on capital gains and dividends. It would, in effect, eliminate 25% of that tax expenditure and significantly drive up capital gains and dividend rates. As I indicated earlier, the top marginal rate on capital gains and dividends is set to rise by 59% in less than 18 months if the President gets his way, and if my friends on the other side get theirs. This option, though described as a cutback on a tax expenditure, would drive that rate up higher. The marginal rate on two-thirds of capital gains income would be driven up 72%. It would raise $49 billion, though, over 10 years for our tax-seeking friends. The eighth tax expenditure cutback option would sharply curtail tax benefits for families who send their kids to college. It would eliminate the Hope Scholarship and lifetime learning credits and phase out the student loan interest deduction. And for that half of the population that pays the freight in society, the 49% who pay income tax, our friends on the other side are telling them that their load is just going to get much heavier. That would be their message to middle-income American families who want to send their kids to college. This option would raise $48 billion over 10 years. The ninth tax expenditure cutback option would reduce limits on contributions to retirement plans. About 50% of American workers participate in retirement plans. They save for their own retirement. They don't look to rely only on Social Security. There is bipartisan consensus that for America to remain prosperous, families and individuals must save more during their working lives. Yet this option would go in the other direction. It would mean less in retirement savings. CBO says it would raise $46 billion over 10 years if we take that one away. Now, the 10th tax expenditure cutback option is one we've heard much about here from my friends on the other side. It would tax partnership interest known as carried interest. Oh, goodness. It would actually tax partnership interest known as carried interest, like ordinary income rather than capital gain. Interestingly enough, with a solidly Democratic Senate last year, this revenue raiser did not pass. There's a lot of speculation about that. I won't join it, but it is curious that when constituencies that favor Democrats decisively raised legitimate concerns about the possible negative effects on private equity and enterprise value, this proposal didn't quite make it past the finish line. That proposal would raise $21 billion over 10 years. Now, Mr. President, if you assume no interactive effects, the list of options I walked through adds up to $2.27 trillion in new tax hikes. That's a bit more than called for by the Senate Democratic budget outline. Recall that outline produced by Senate Democrats boiled down to $1.73 trillion in cutbacks on tax expenditures. But look at how broad these tax hikes are. They hit big chunks of the 49% of American households who pay income taxes. Take a look at the chart again. Okay. This is a chart that confirms what many of us have suspected. Though they might not come clean about it, when you look at the code and you look at our deficits, there is only one place for Democrats to go if they're going to close the deficit, their way, with no meaningful spending reductions. They are going to have to hit tax expenditures, and specifically those that benefit middle-class itemizers. They hit residents of blue states. They hit seniors. They hit everyone who owns a life insurance policy. They hit everyone who takes an itemized deduction for giving to their church, local food kitchen, or other charities. They hit everyone with a mortgage and everyone who receives a child tax credit and anyone with capital gains. They hit middle-income families and students who benefit from education tax benefits. They hit those who save for retirement. And they hit those folks who start up businesses and take a future profits interest in the form of a capital gain. But to hear the President talk, you would think we could get there by taxing corporate jets and yachts. I'm accustomed to the media carrying the water of liberal politicians, but there has been a real dereliction of duty in allowing President Obama to get away with this. Even at this late date, he is still getting away with it. He has no plan. Tell me, he has no plan. Show it to me. He talks about his plan, but we have yet to see it in writing. In fact, there is no plan. The press ridiculed Richard Nixon for his secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. But here we are in a catastrophic crisis, and President Obama gets a pass when it comes to his secret plan to balance the budget? To suggest that a debt crisis triggered by $14.3 trillion in debt can be fixed by taxing the luxuries of evil rich people is so childish and lacking in seriousness that the President should have been called out on it immediately. But he wasn't. He was allowed to get away with it. Mr. President, President Obama's balanced approach, he talks about balanced approach all the time, one that includes no meaningful reductions to his historic levels of spending, is a plan for economic stagnation and national ruin, and it is a plan to bankrupt seniors. He wants shared sacrifice from whom? I think we've just shown that the middle class is going to get hit the hardest. I want shared prosperity by cutting back on spending and getting the federal government out of most of our lives in ways that are intrusive and costly to being able to get jobs and raise jobs and do what has to be done in this country. Well, it's a plan to bankrupt our seniors. The President knows this, as do his colleagues in Congress. He knows that his supposed plan does nothing to fix the long-term trajectory of his deficit spending. So the question the folks need to ask is, what is he hiding? How does the left plan on closing the gap and balancing the budget their way? The answer is the elimination or reduction of tax expenditures, and that means middle-class tax increases. Mr. President, here, my friends on the other side, you think the only folks hit by Democratic tax increases will be corporate jet owners, yachtsmen, and millionaires. But when you peek behind the rhetorical curtain, you find that does not pan out. Most of the tax base is in the middle and upper middle income families who make up that 49% of Americans who are the only ones who shoulder the burden of the income tax. We know that the recent numbers are the bottom 51% of all households do not pay income taxes. No, it's the 49% of Americans who shoulder the burden of the income tax. That's where the money is. And as I've shown with the CBO and Joint Committee on Taxation Options, that's where you have to go. Without a counterbalancing rate cut, this version of tax reform means fewer resources for home ownership, retirement savings, and charitable giving. But don't say I did not warn you. Those who want to treat tax expenditures as some abstract budgetary honeypot risk having the folks that make the honey, the tax-paying bees, to rightfully sting you. As one who hails from the Beehive State, I can tell you, you will feel the sting. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm here this afternoon to discuss our work towards addressing the national debt and staving off a collision with our debt ceiling or a default on our financial obligations. First, I'd like to commend Majority Leader Reid for putting forward a proposal which would make a very serious $2.4 trillion down payment on deficit reduction and, most importantly, end the impasse over the debt ceiling. I encourage my Republican colleagues to support it or offer some reasonable changes that would allow them to support it. But let me also address some developments on the other side of the Capitol, where an extremist group of House Republicans are continuing their my way or the highway, what President Lincoln called rule or ruin approach to these negotiations. Amazingly, news reports indicate that Pell Grants may be put on the chopping block in Speaker Boehner's latest effort to appease the most extreme members of his party. Mr. President, this is getting ridiculous. Rhode Island's great Senator Claiborne Pell first proposed the grants that now bear his name. He envisioned a grant that would enable low-income students to attend our country's wonderful colleges and universities so that they too could share in the American dream. Why do these far-right extremists in the House want to snuff that out? In 1976, the first year that Pell Grants were fully funded, a full Pell Grant paid 72% of the cost of attendance at a typical four-year public college. Today, a full Pell Grant covers just 34% of those costs. And even that, they're willing to attack. This vital assistance from Pell Grants can often mean the difference between being able to attend college or not. With many families in Rhode Island and across America still struggling in this struggling economy, we should be looking for ways to strengthen Pell Grants, not weaken them. America needs more college graduates, not fewer. During my time in the Senate, we've taken steps to improve the Pell Grant program. After 4 years of level funding under President Bush, we began to increase the maximum grant from $4,050 in academic year 2006-07 to $5,550 for this coming academic year. We also increased the minimum family income that automatically qualifies a student for the maximum Pell Grant, a change which better reflects today's economic realities. Despite the clear need for continued investment in our future through Pell Grants, a need that has long had bipartisan support and backing, a group of House Republicans this year began an outright assault on Pell Grant funding. These grants are needed more than ever as the economic downturn has led more people to seek higher education in an effort to find a job. But not to this band of extremists. The House Republican budget would have slashed Pell Grants, reducing the average award by $1,775 and cutting off more than 1.3 million Americans, including nearly 5,800 students in Rhode Island. I understand the need to find savings in the federal budget and to make difficult choices. And Leader Reid's proposal offers up $2.4 trillion worth. But we could also make bad choices in going about this. And of all the bad choices we could make, cutting Pell Grants is among the worst. America needs a highly trained workforce, and Pell Grants help make the promise of a college education a reality. After America spoke out and the Senate defeated the extreme House Republican budget, I hope that the assault on the Pell Grant was behind us, at least for a while. Yesterday, however, The Hill, a newspaper here in Washington, reported that some Republican House members are opposing Speaker Boehner's debt ceiling increase bill over funding it provides for Pell Grants. In this article, someone called Pell Grants welfare. some welfare, helping kids afford college and pursue their dreams. Today there's talk that cuts to Pell Grants are being discussed as the pound of flesh required by the most far-right members of the Speaker's caucus as the price of supporting his bill. Remember that these House Republicans continue to protect every tax giveaway to special interests, every one, while they want to cut off access to college for regular kids. The simple fact is this: Pell Grants help lower-income people achieve the dream of college and improve those young people's prospects for careers and employment. It's good for them, and it's good for America. The Pell Grant program doesn't give a free ride, but it does give a boost up, and it's a wise investment in the future of our country, a future where the fates of nations will depend on the educations of their people. Earlier this week, student and education advocacy organizations, including the Education Trust, Campus Progress, the National Council of La Raza, and the United States Student Association joined together to save Pell. I applaud their advocacy and commitment to fighting for Pell Grants, and I am proud to join their effort. I strongly urge the far-right extremists who are pulling their party and the House of Representatives and this country over the cliff to end their reckless attack on the American middle class. Take the victory you've been offered and stop the damage. Ronald Reagan, in 8 years, I believe, raised the debt ceiling 18 times. The Tea Party has been here 6 months and has put the country on the brink of default, days away. Instead, I ask my colleagues to work with Democrats on a bipartisan solution that does not attack the fundamental underpinnings of a successful middle class, like Medicare, like Social Security, like Pell Grants. Avert the looming debt ceiling collision and reduce our deficits. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. A quorum call here on the Senate floor. Just to let you know what's happening on the other side of the Capitol, you can see some of the alerts down at the bottom of your screen. But the debt and deficit bills going through the House and Senate. Speaker Boehner's bill passed the House 218 to 210. No Democrats voted in favor of that bill, and 22 Republicans voted against the measure. It's going to go on to the Senate now, and Majority Leader Reid will be taking the floor at some point this evening. Just to let you know, on that vote in the House, 10 of those voting nay against the Boehner bill were House freshmen. And, of course, the block of 5 South Carolina Republicans voted for that measure, the 6th a Democrat voting against. And you can find all of the names of the Republicans who voted nay and the vote count. It'll be up on our website, cspan.org. Just check for that in a little bit. Again, bringing you live coverage here from the floor of the Senate. And over in the House, the 218 to 210 passage of Speaker Boehner's bill for the debt and deficit reduction. It's going to add a balanced budget amendment, which made it more palatable for Republicans to vote for that bill tonight. And any kind of deficit debt ceiling increase would be contingent on a balanced budget amendment passing and being added to the Constitution. So we'll keep you posted. And again, do check cspan.org for the list on the vote for tonight.
Well, what are you doing? You objecting? I'm supposed to object until Mitch gets here, evidently.
Can you turn his mic off, please?
Is there objection? The objection is heard. The clerk will continue to call the roll.
Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Beckidge,